Hello, everybody. My name is Laura Megan, and today I'm hosting a video, and it's Michelle Cooney, and she has, which is a brilliant thing, she's actually joined us today for a quick interview, and the interview is just to basically have a chat around females in engineering. And the purpose of this video is for a project which we're rolling out this year. It's called Emerge. Now, Emerge is a free online resource that has been equipped together by 5 partner countries across Europe. And the purpose of the project is for female engineers to teach them how to grow and develop their businesses and from an engineering and enterprise perspective. The project will enable women how to build their business, so we've loads of resources available, and the resources span from a female startup online course, which is roughly 9 modules, and that goes into funding, investors, and how to do a business plan, and how to find your ingenuity, and loads of case studies in there, and women who've already tried and achieved such enterprise developments. And then we also have learning placements as part of the program, and we have an online collaborative knowledge exchange platform, which is where this video will live. So this is all part of us collaborating together throughout Europe and bringing female engineers together from an engineering enterprise perspective. So I'm just going to ask Michelle a couple of questions based on her experience as an engineer and working in enterprise. And Michelle, my first question is, I think you went in a roundabout way in engineering, so you kind of didn't go the normal route. So what route did you take?
Yeah, I guess you could say I took a bit of a meandering path, all right. So I started in the early 90s in marine radio. So I was in Cork, and the equipment I trained on is probably about the size of your American fridge these days. So from there, I went to process engineering. So I worked with Procter & Gamble for about 15 years. First, I was in the lab, and then I was in the process engineering, so working on all elements of the efficiency and reliability of cosmetics making. So the raw materials, the ingredients, the making process, the storage, all of that. I wound my way through a master's in English and philosophy, completely unrelated to engineering. And then I found myself back working with a composite center in UL, a composite research center. But I guess I'd always been kind of fascinated with how things work, you know. So I was always, in our house, we were surrounded, I have lots of brothers, and we were all surrounded by cars and bits of cars and, motorbikes in buckets. And there was always someone tinkering around with an engine or, pulling things apart and putting them back together. And one of my favorite programs, I think, when I was a kid was this program called Scrap Heap Challenge.
Yeah.
Which is where all the engineers would get together and they'd have to build something crazy like a hovercraft or a rocket or a trebuchet or, anything like that. And I was really fascinated at the idea that lots of other small, useless pieces of metal could be turned into something very functional. So for the past number of years, I've actually stepped out of the engineering coalface, and I'm now working with companies on attracting funding to their company, particularly in engineering. I don't particularly look after health, but in engineering, and all of that, I guess, means that I've got to stay on top of all the modern engineering topics, but also all the policies that underlie those topics and may, I suppose, format or inform future trends in training and college courses and anything that's coming down the line.
Wow.
So that's how, yeah.
My understanding of engineering and the etymology of the word, how it's it's really only about problem solving, isn't it? Can you elaborate on that more for me, please?
Yeah, so if you look at the etymology of engineering, it's from the Latin ingeniatur, which is kind of the same as ingenium, so it's genius, which is about, I suppose it's about the clever creation of something. So ingeniatur means to create, ingenium means clever, so it's a clever creation of something. And I suppose if you look at it historically, the first guy who was on a horse and rode the horse and came to a gorge and thought, I need to cross that. I need to figure out a way to build something to get me from A to B. You could say he was the first civil and structural engineer, you know. But nowadays, civil and structural engineering, you could be doing a lot more than just building a bridge. So you could be delivering energy to a refugee camp. You could be testing aerospace. You could be, you could be building new bridges, but it's not necessarily all that you'd be doing. But I think what everyone thinks of when they hear the word engineer is civil, structural, mechanical, electrical, those sort of traditional engineering roles. But nowadays, there's so many more nowadays. So you only have to look up college courses and just Google in engineering, and so many of them come up. So it's, you can have, I've got a list here: data engineering, climate engineering, sustainability engineering, nanotech, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things. But even, I think something that people miss around engineering is that the humanities are very important to the technical side of things. So in the humanities, we would talk about social engineering, so engineering on a human basis that could be good for either good or nefarious ends. So an example of that is, good local planning that enables efficient water supplies. And then on the other side, in the social engineering that we're all dealt with every day, through marketing, through media, etc. None of us like to think about the the large-scale psychological manipulation of the human being, but it does happen. So I guess in a roundabout way, what I'm trying to say is that modern engineering is very multidisciplinary. It's not just building stuff anymore.
Yeah.
It's looking at every angle of a problem and fitting in the whole social, environmental, design, technical aspects of it. I mean, if you took my Fitbit, for example, other fitness trackers are available. I should say that. But, if you look at the Fitbit, right? So it's got health data, which is data engineering. It's got location, satellite positioning. It's got the tech, which is the computer engineering, battery. It's got design engineering in terms of the materials. But it's also got social engineering in terms of the marketing. I mean, why do you want a Fitbit? You want one, A, because everyone else has one, or B, because it's something you can't live without on your route to getting healthy. And it's been sold now. So it's been socially engineered as well. So yeah, for me then, I guess modern engineering is really just about solving problems,
Yeah. And I think you're so right there that it is a problem solving for the human element, and everything probably engineers wouldn't probably exist only for human. Do you know what I'm saying? They go hand in hand. And I suppose the whole digital aspect to it as well. And then engineers have to be so equipped, not only in their field, but in the digital world and the virtual world as well, which is the new up and coming, because they always have to be ahead of their trend and ahead of their game to try and keep up with world problems as populations increase and challenges and problems increase, and the number of problems. So they have to be able to try and preempt and be ready and to tackle those challenges. So yeah, and I think that's very interesting that we're not just talking about an economic perspective here, we are talking about a social perspective, which is really important.
I think it's important that we remember that when we're doing engineering, I suppose fundamentally underneath it all, when someone decides at 5, 10, 15, 20 that they want to be an engineer, and you say, well, why do you want to be an engineer? There is a human reasoning behind it. I want to invent a clean water supply. I want to invent, the next best fridge, or the hydro-powered car, or, there's always a human need underlying that, And I guess more and more these days, which probably leads us quite a bit into our next question, more and more these days, we see that the human need is not removed from the climate need, from the environmental need, that everything we do as humans has an impact on the earth. And if we have caused the problems, then it's really only our ingenuity that's going to solve them. So there's very much a trend and a recognition that a lot of the problems in the world, climate change, carbon sequestration, the pollution of the ocean, all of those things, they need us to focus on those actual problems now. And you can very much see that in the way that funding has gone and funding trends have gone. There have been a lot of policies coming out of, almost every government on earth, but particularly from Europe, the biodiversity, the Green Deal, and all of those topics are around, well, how do we as humans create a symbiotic relationship with the planet that we're living on, utilizing the brilliant brains that we have, the amazing engineering talent that we have, and ensuring, the sustainability of the human race into the future and into future generations. And that's a big trend in engineering,
Yeah. And so, like you're talking there about the green and climate change. So can we elaborate, the European Green Deal and the trends in sustainability? And from a female perspective, how do you feel that females are important, like in terms of engineering and facilitating these developments and reactions to the likes of climate change?
I think it is changing. I have nieces and cousins, and and I have a daughter who informs me that she wants to be a zoologist, which in a way is biological engineering. And I would be very proud of that. But if you look at one of the latest UN reports, there's still only 10 to 12% of females in core engineering, so in the civil, the structural, the electrical, the mechanical. Females are tending to participate a lot more on I don't say the margins because that's not the right word, but on the sort of partnership sciences that go with those. There's a lot of women in biomedical, there's a lot of women in environmental, there's a lot of women in sustainability engineering. And that's, I don't think that's a gender perspective. I wouldn't want to put it in that sort of terms, but it's probably easier for women to break into those so-called softer engineering topics than the very traditionally male hard engineering topics.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work being done in a lot of universities. There's amazing STEM programs. There's the Athena Swan, and people have realized that women are clever. Women are clever. We fix problems every day. If you're a housewife, you run a budget, which is financial engineering. You run a schedule. You run organization, planning, all of those things, and they're skills I think that can quite easily be applied to larger scale engineering problems. I wouldn't want to put any girl off engineering, and I would say with hand on my heart, I hope every little girl becomes an engineer, because we're all engineers.
Yeah.
It's just about creating and fixing problems And yes, you can go through the formal education process, and there's so many brilliant and distinct courses out there. And but if you still want to do stuff and fix stuff, you don't have to do something very specific. Start with something very generalized. Give yourself a taster of all those things, and think about it in terms of problem solving.
Yeah, because I saw Helen Mirren, it was a long time ago, and she said something that if women are more respected and if women are more inclusive in activities across the globe, that everybody does better. As you rightly said, in the family, everything a woman does is for the benefit of the whole family. And when you talk about the shopping list, it's they'll base it on what we have to spend, not what we want, and then the kids and the older people get looked after first. So so it removes the hierarchy and makes everyone on an even keel. And I think to input that into engineering is really important. And what also I find is that women aren't taught, like for example, a zoologist is an engineer. You aren't taught the types of jobs.
Yeah.
You're actually presented the typical female jobs, like a nurse or a beautician or a cook or whatever it may be. And you're not actually opened up to other potential careers. And that, I think, being brought into the educational system would actually be the stepping stone and the foundation to women opening doors into the educational world and probably becoming the engineers that the world needs. Because, as you rightly said, a balanced approach is what's needed from male and female perspective. I think I read somewhere that the first seatbelts that were developed actually failed because they only catered for men. They didn't cater for women. So men are obviously different in stature and size and weight in comparison to women. So they had to make it work, bring in women. So to have that diversity is important. So, and I think with the gender gap in corporations, so like from your experience, for example, I would assume that your bosses were probably all male, and you probably worked in male-dominated fields and teams.
Not in Procter & Gamble, funnily enough. They were actually really very good about promoting internally on merit, whether you were male or female. And I'm trying to think, almost every boss I had in Procter & Gamble was female. Wow. So the head of the lab, the head of buying, head of planning, the head of making, and one was the head. Yeah, pretty much all of them.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was actually really, really good. And I think as a young person entering the world of work, it was a real inspiration to see these women, leading manufacturing teams, leading cosmetic making teams, leading lab teams, and not having to set aside their essentialness to do so. Yeah. We didn't have to compete. They didn't compete in the world of men. They didn't have to put on any sort of persona to do it. They were there by merit of their study and their qualifications. And I have to say P&G were very forward in that respect. They were a good company to work for. Not to say that I haven't seen the opposite in other places that I've worked. I've had my fair share of mansplaining. But I think I just wouldn't want to put those kinds of things to put any young girl off, or anyone, who's thinking about going into engineering, because the fields are so wide and so respected nowadays. So the respect isn't necessarily on the civil, structural, mechanical engineering anymore. It's still there, but like everybody respects a biochemist these days because they know what they're doing is important. Everybody respects a sustainability engineer, male or female. It makes no difference. The quality of the training that people get now inspires confidence, in their abilities. And I think that's very important to remember. And I think it's important for us to make sure that the same quality is available to everybody across Europe. Yeah. The same quality of training, the same quality of availability, the same quality of access is available to everybody across Europe. Because I think that's the only way we're going to make a very fair engineering system.
Yeah, and as you say, for survival, economically, environmentally, and socially, and every aspect, there is a huge gap for women, and for us to be able to sustain as human beings, we need to close that gap by having that inclusiveness. And what's lovely about this is that women now, through the digital means and social media, they have a voice. So they're actually telling all their great stories, and they're proud, and they're able to show what they've done and achieved. And I think that's an inspiration for the future women, because they're getting that exposure, and women and younger girls are saying they're actually able to put a label on what people are doing and say, well, that's actually what I want to be. So it's an exciting time that we live in, and I think the digital world has been a large catalyst to that as well.
Yeah, so, yeah. I don't think there's I don't want to say there's no gender divide in digitization, but there's an equality about access to the information and the ability to use it. Facebook is offered not for men or for women. It's offered for everybody. There is a sort of equality underlying. Obviously, there's algorithms that run in the background that do things for particular audiences. But I'm sure technology is neither male nor female, I think. The utilization of the technology and the design of the technology can be informed by gender considerations. But the actual technology itself, it's actually quite leveling, because it's neither male nor female. It just does what we tell it to do. And it's our biases and our internal biases, I think, that we have to overcome when we're programming, when we're designing. I suppose that's one great thing about engineering proper, is that it's not. There's plenty of bias in the system. The actual school, or the etymology of the word, is not. Is not biased.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I suppose engineering resonates like a machine, whereas when females bring the humanized things a bit more, they bring a different element where they can. And I suppose when you look at in history, it's only my generation is really the first generation of women who've had degrees across the board, and we've caught up very quickly in the last 10 years. In respect with speed in any education faculty, engineering regardless. So I can see us all, well, it would be a nice thought to think that we're all going to be aligned, and all, I suppose that women would have a heavier footfall in the engineering industry in the next few years to come. And Michelle, thank you so much for talking to me today. Really interesting to get a voice from a woman on the ground who's been there, done that, and has seen it. And you've been there when it was the beginning, I suppose, when women are being introduced to engineering, and it's a testament to show that you've all that you've achieved and the experiences that you've had as a result of that. So thank you.
No, I'd like girls to think that it's not, but once an engineer, always an engineer. You may not necessarily work in the field for the rest of your life. There's so many other support businesses that go with engineering, So like me, I literally look for funding for people to enable their amazing engineering and scientific technologies. So it's not a case, you won't have your hands in an engine forever, even though that's pretty fun.
And that's brilliant, because with the enterprise element to the project, you got your experience, which is really good for a start off, leaving college or a graduate, and then whatever placement you do, and then as you gain your experiences, then as you see, you can fine tune what you really want to do and focus on that, and build a company or a business out of that, and as you say, assist other people in achieving what they need to achieve. So there's great satisfaction out of that.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, very much so. I mean, I suppose it's one of my life's greatest thrills is that when one of my companies wins, loads of money, and they can go ahead and develop the products that they want to develop, and I know that they're sort of secure for a few years with that funding behind them. It's a great sense of achievement, but it's also a great sense of achievement in terms of whatever product or service that they are engineering, because you don't get funded in this day and age unless you're solving a problem, unless you're directly addressing a need or a niche in the market that nobody else has thought of. So when they do get funded, their choice of product and their choice of engineering is validated by external people, and that's actually really, really good. That gives companies a really good feeling and a sense of confidence and security that what they're doing is actually something right.
And that support it's really fundamental, isn't it, to pivot them forward, as you say, in the direction they need to go to do what they need to do. And that it's great being enveloped and integrated in policies nationally and across Europe. So, well, thank you, Michelle, and we look forward to catching up with you again, and take care, and thanks everybody for joining us today. And as I said, you will find this video and other resources, loads of resources, blogs, other videos from partners across Europe related to the same topic, and probably different questions or a different slant based on their countries and what areas they're covering. And then the website is www.emergeengineers.eu. So that's emergeengineers.eu. So follow us on Facebook, and you can also follow Momentum on Facebook, where we'll be hosting this video, and we look forward to catching up with you again. So thank you, everybody. Bye bye. Thank you, Michelle.
Bye everyone.